It was a quiet neighborhood, but the house I was staying in felt completely removed from everything around it. The driveway was long and winding, stretching back far enough that it seemed to pull the house into its own world. Surrounded by tall trees and thick shadows, it was the kind of place that felt both peaceful and strange. During the day, the sunlight barely broke through the dense branches, casting an eerie glow that seemed to cling to the house. Once you were up the drive, the house stood solid and quiet, almost too quiet. No one could easily approach without being seen or heard, and there was no reason for anyone to come near unless they had a purpose. There was no parking nearby, no casual walkers passing by. In some ways, that isolation was comforting, a little fortress hidden from prying eyes. But at night, it took on a different feel. The stillness felt heavy, the house darker than the street lights could reach, and the quiet wasn't peaceful anymore, it was something else entirely. With the dogs settled in, the evening started out exactly as expected. I followed my routine, making sure each dog was fed, given their meds, and happily wandering around the house. I had the TV on, letting a comforting hum fill the quiet space as I relaxed, settling into the house's rhythm. Finally, feeling drowsy, I headed to the master bedroom, which was spacious and filled with tall windows that overlooked the driveway. It was the perfect spot to unwind, knowing I had a clear view of anyone approaching. I scrolled through my phone, let my mind wander, and everything seemed calm. There was no sign of anything unusual, no hint that tonight would be different. But as I turned off the lights and lay there, ready to drift off to sleep, something shifted. The atmosphere in the room seemed to thicken, as if an invisible weight was pressing down on me. Staring up at the dark ceiling, I tried to shake off the strange feeling creeping over me. The room was silent, and nothing seemed out of place. Yet, something inside me screamed that I wasn't alone. It was an intense, uneasy feeling, like I was being watched from somewhere close but hidden. A chill spread through me, and I couldn't ignore it anymore. My heart pounded faster, every instinct telling me to get out. The hair on my neck stood up, and a voice in my mind whispered, "Leave." Without a second thought, I grabbed my things, called my boyfriend, and rushed out of the house. As I drove away, I looked back at the dark, silent windows, half expecting to see someone or something watching me go. The next morning, I returned to the house, trying to shake off the strange events from the night before. I told myself it was just my mind playing tricks on me. I went straight into my usual routine, feeding the dogs and getting them settled. But as I walked through the house, something felt wrong. Little things caught my attention. Candy wrappers were scattered on the counter, even though I hadn't seen them the night before. Doors I was certain I had closed were now open. Small details seemed off, as if someone had been there after I'd left. A heavy feeling of unease crept back in, stronger than before. I quickly finished up, made sure the dogs were okay, and left the house, my mind racing with questions. Something was definitely not right. Feeling unsettled, I decided to call the homeowner and tell her about the strange things I'd noticed. I explained about the moved items, the doors left open, and the odd feeling I couldn't shake. She listened quietly and then laughed lightly, saying, "Oh, that must be our old ghost." Her response caught me off guard. She sounded amused, almost dismissive, as if my concerns were just part of the house's personality. She assured me no one else had a key and that her family hadn't been by. Still uneasy, I mentioned that I'd have my boyfriend come by to stay with me, just in case. She didn't seem to mind, but I was left wondering, was it really just a joke to her, or did she know something she wasn't saying? That evening, my boyfriend joined me at the house, and having him there made me feel safer. We settled in, playing with the dogs and watching movies, trying to keep things light. Hours passed peacefully, and I began to think that maybe I'd just overreacted. But later that night, as I went to the bathroom, I noticed him standing by the front door, completely focused, his eyes fixed on something outside. Before I could ask, he motioned for me to stay quiet. "There's someone out there," he whispered. My heart sank. He described a dark figure he'd seen peeking through the front window. But when we looked again, there was nothing. The air grew tense as we stood there, listening, straining to hear any sound. Whatever or whoever was out there had vanished, leaving behind only silence and the unsettling knowledge that we weren't alone. That night was enough to break any sense of safety I'd felt in the house. We put the dogs in their kennels, double-checked the doors, and decided to wait it out a bit before making a quick exit. My boyfriend kept a close eye on every window, every shadow, as if expecting that figure to reappear. Eventually, we grabbed our things and made a dash for the car, locking ourselves inside before taking a final look at the house. It stood there, dark and silent, but it felt as though something was watching us leave. The sense of danger was so intense, so immediate, that I knew I couldn't ignore it any longer. The next morning, I returned only briefly to care for the dogs. As I walked through the house, every creak, every shadow reminded me of the night before. When the owner later asked me back, I turned her down without a second thought. There was no amount of money that would bring me back to that place. The final decision was clear: I couldn't go back. No amount of money could convince me to set foot in that house again. The sense of dread I'd felt was unlike anything I'd ever experienced, and every instinct told me to stay away. When the owner reached out months later, asking if I could watch the dogs again, I politely declined. I told her I was busy, but the truth was, I couldn't shake the feeling that returning would be a mistake. Some places, I realized, aren't meant to be revisited. That house, with its dark corners and eerie silences, was one of them. I had come too close to something unexplainable, something that left a permanent mark on my mind. It was a warning I wouldn't ignore. It was a regular Saturday, nothing unusual. My mom and I gathered our laundry and headed to the local laundromat, something we did every couple of weeks. The routine was simple: load the washers, run a few errands, then return to move everything into the dryers. We knew the drill, and everything was calm and familiar. After finishing up some errands, we pulled back into the laundromat parking lot. I didn't think twice about anything. It was just another quick stop to check on our clothes. We parked and started chatting in the car, both of us on our phones, waiting for the dryers to finish up. Everything felt normal, just another chore-filled weekend. But we had no idea how quickly that would change. As we sat in the car, I noticed a large brown pickup truck pulling in nearby. The man behind the wheel looked to be in his mid-30s, and he parked just a little too close to us. At first, I didn't think much of it, but then I saw him staring right into our car. His gaze felt intense, unsettling. I tried to brush it off, thinking maybe he was just zoning out or waiting for someone. But the longer we sat there, the more uncomfortable it became. He wasn't just glancing over, he was watching us, almost studying us. I felt my stomach twist, a nagging feeling that something wasn't right. I exchanged a nervous glance with my mom, and that's when I knew she'd noticed too. The man didn't stop staring, and the tension in the car grew. My mom, trying to ease my nerves, suggested I go check on the clothes. But the idea of getting out with him watching made me feel even more uneasy. I shook my head and told her I'd rather stay in the car. She agreed, sensing my discomfort, and decided to go herself. As she opened her door, the man shifted slightly, making room as if he'd been waiting for her to get out. I quickly locked the doors behind her, feeling a wave of relief, but it didn't last long. My eyes stayed on him, and I could feel my pulse quicken, wondering what he was going to do next. As soon as my mom stepped inside the laundromat, the man walked around to my side of the car. He knocked on my window, motioning for me to unlock the door. I pretended not to see him, my eyes glued to my phone, hoping he'd lose interest and walk away. But he didn't. His knocking turned into banging, his face inches from the glass as he pulled on the door handle. My heart was racing, and I felt trapped, unsure of what to do. Finally, I held up my phone, showing him that I had dialed 911. I thought that would scare him off. But instead, he just stood there, his eyes dark and unflinching, refusing to back down. The man kept tugging on the handle, his face twisted in frustration. I could feel my hands shaking, clutching my phone tightly, ready to press call if he got any closer. Just then, my mom came out of the laundromat and saw what was happening. Without hesitation, she rushed over, yelling at him to back off, her voice sharp and angry. The man shot her a look, a flash of annoyance crossing his face before he quickly turned and walked back to his truck. He climbed in, started the engine, and drove off without a single glance back. My mom and I stood there in shock, both of us rattled by how close it had come. We hurried back inside, feeling safer under the bright lights and with other people around. But the fear lingered, and neither of us could shake it. Once we were inside, the laundromat worker noticed our shaken expressions and asked what had happened. My mom explained the encounter, and the woman's face darkened. She nodded slowly, then told us that this wasn't the first time she'd heard about that man. Apparently, he'd been hanging around the laundromat for the past week, trying to approach women and girls, making everyone uneasy. Hearing that sent a fresh chill down my spine. Knowing he had been lurking around, looking for his next target, made the whole experience feel even more disturbing. We finished up our laundry as quickly as possible, glancing nervously out the windows to make sure he hadn't come back. That was the last time we went to that laundromat. Neither of us wanted to risk running into him or anyone like him again. After we left the laundromat, the ride home was silent. Both of us were lost in our thoughts, replaying the unsettling encounter. I couldn't shake the feeling of his eyes on me, his persistence, the way he refused to leave even when I showed him I was calling for help. It left a heavy weight on my chest, a warning that felt too close. When we finally pulled into our driveway, we breathed a little easier, grateful to be home. But the fear hadn't gone away, it lingered, making me double-check the locks that night and glance over my shoulder every time I went out. That one encounter left a mark, a reminder of how quickly a routine day could twist into something dark and dangerous. And from then on, I trusted my instincts, knowing they might just save me from someone like him. That night, I lay awake, every small noise in the house magnified, each creak and groan making me jump. The memory of the man's face at the window wouldn't leave me. I kept thinking about how determined he was, how close he came to getting in. It felt like a close call, one that could have ended very differently if my mom hadn't come back at that moment. In the days that followed, that fear stayed with me, settling in a way that made me cautious, maybe even paranoid. Every time I was out in public, I found myself scanning faces, wary of anyone who stared too long. The world didn't feel as safe as it had before, and I was left with a lesson I wouldn't forget. Trust your instincts and never ignore that feeling in your gut. The first few weeks in our new home were filled with the excitement of settling in, but the neighbors remained mostly quiet. They kept to their yards, rarely making eye contact or greeting us as we passed by. It felt strange, like we were intruding on a private world. The silence was deafening, and I wondered if we had made a mistake in choosing this place. Every now and then, I would catch a glimpse of them through their windows, going about their routines. It felt as if they were watching us, but I couldn't be sure. We tried to be friendly, waving when we saw them outside, but the responses were brief and reserved. This lack of warmth left me uneasy, planting a seed of doubt about the neighborhood. Despite the initial awkwardness, I hoped things would improve as we got to know each other. After all, we were all neighbors now, sharing the same street and space. I wanted to believe we could create a friendly atmosphere, but the odd behavior of the neighbors only deepened my sense of uncertainty. Gradually, the atmosphere began to shift. The neighbors started to come outside more often, and for a moment, it felt like things were changing for the better. We exchanged more smiles and hellos, and it seemed like we were finally becoming part of the community. I even invited them to join us for small gatherings in our yard, hoping to break the ice further. However, it didn't take long for me to notice something unsettling. The male neighbor would appear whenever I was outside, always just a little too close for comfort. Whether I was gardening, playing with my child, or even just checking the mail, he would find a reason to linger nearby. It felt as though he was watching me, his eyes fixed in a way that sent shivers down my spine. At first, I thought it might just be my imagination, but the pattern continued. His presence became more pronounced, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was overly interested in what I was doing. It made me uneasy, and I found myself hesitating to step outside alone, wondering what he might do or say next. The friendliness of the neighborhood now felt tainted, as if the warmth was overshadowed by an unwelcome shadow. As the days passed, the male neighbor's behavior grew even stranger. He began to text me at odd hours, sending messages that felt too personal for someone I barely knew. I hadn't given him my number, so I was confused and a bit alarmed. Each time my phone buzzed, I felt a mix of curiosity and dread, unsure of what to expect. His messages started innocently enough, asking how I was doing or if I needed help with anything. But soon they became unsettling, with comments about my appearance and questions about my schedule. It felt like he was trying to insert himself into my life in a way that made me uncomfortable. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was crossing a line, blurring the boundaries of our neighborly relationship. Every time I received a text, I felt my heart race, a nervousness creeping in. I wanted to respond politely, but the messages left me feeling exposed, as if he was watching my every move. The sense of safety I had hoped for in this neighborhood was fading fast, replaced by a growing worry about what might happen next. The male neighbor's presence continued to loom over my daily life, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me closely. I noticed him outside at all hours, often just sitting in his yard, staring toward my house. It was as if he timed his appearances to coincide with when I was home alone. His gaze felt heavy, making it hard to relax, and I found myself glancing out the window more than once to check if he was there. He began to make strange attempts to interact with my child as well, always looking for excuses to come over. Whether it was offering to help with our yard work or commenting on our playtime, his intentions felt off. My instincts screamed that he was trying to insert himself into our family, and it left me feeling uneasy and trapped. With each passing day, the friendly facade of our neighborhood began to crumble, revealing a growing sense of danger. I felt I was living in a nightmare, unsure of what he might do next or how to protect my family from his unwanted attention. The fear of his presence overshadowed the excitement I once felt about our new home. One evening, while I was outside, I overheard a heated argument coming from the neighbor's house. The voices were raised, and I could make out bits of the conversation. The male neighbor's girlfriend was clearly upset, questioning him about his behavior. She was frustrated, asking why he kept watching us and why he was always outside when I was alone. Her tone was filled with worry, and I felt a rush of relief to know that someone else recognized how strange his actions were. In the heat of the moment, I heard her mention that he had recently changed his medication. That one line struck me hard. It made me wonder if his odd behavior was linked to something deeper, something beyond his control. But it also raised more questions in my mind. Was he truly a danger to us, or was he simply struggling with his own issues? Even as I felt sympathy for him, my instincts warned me to stay cautious. The argument ended, and I didn't see him outside for a few days after that. But the uncertainty hung in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. The neighborhood felt darker, and I found myself feeling trapped in a situation that was spiraling out of control. Despite the brief calm after the argument, the tension in the neighborhood lingered. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had overheard. The idea that his behavior could be influenced by medication changes made me anxious, but it didn't ease my fears. Every time I stepped outside, I felt his presence, even if he wasn't there. I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, checking the street and my yard for any sign of him. Then, one evening, my boyfriend's car tire was mysteriously slashed. I was shocked and scared. It felt like a personal attack, especially considering the strange behavior of our neighbor. My heart raced as I thought about the possibility that he could be involved. Was it a coincidence, or was it a warning? The slashed tire left us all on edge, and the safety of our home felt shattered. I wanted to believe that everything would be fine, but every day brought new worries. I questioned if we were safe in our own neighborhood or if I needed to take further action to protect my family. The thought of confronting him again sent chills down my spine, but doing nothing felt even worse. As days turned into weeks, the feeling of unease never left me. The neighborhood, which once seemed so inviting, felt like a trap. I couldn't shake the thought that the male neighbor might be watching, waiting for the right moment to act. I became hyper-aware of my surroundings, always scanning for signs of him. The world outside my door felt dangerous and unpredictable. Each time I heard a noise outside, my heart raced. I considered whether I should talk to my partner about my fears or if that would only make him worry more. I needed to keep my family safe, but I felt paralyzed by fear. I kept thinking about whether we should move or make some changes to our daily routine. I wanted to trust that things would get better, but the constant worry made it hard to relax. I needed to take action, but what could I do against a neighbor who might be struggling with his own demons? The uncertainty was suffocating, leaving me feeling trapped in my own home, desperate for a solution that seemed just out of reach. In the following weeks, I felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on me. Every little sound in the house set me on edge, and I couldn't help but jump at shadows. I wanted to be strong for my family, but the fear of our neighbor's behavior lingered like a dark cloud overhead. I started to consider every option to protect my family from whatever threat he posed. Finally, I made the difficult decision to install security cameras around our home. It felt like a small step, but it gave me a sense of control. I hoped the cameras would deter him from lurking around and provide some peace of mind. Each camera was carefully placed, watching every corner of our property. It was a way to reclaim my safety, to ensure that we wouldn't be caught off guard again. As the cameras were set up, I felt a mix of relief and anxiety. I wanted to believe they would help us feel safer, but I also knew that they wouldn't change the fact that we were still living so close to someone whose behavior unsettled me. With the cameras in place, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could start to relax. But deep down, I knew that the true threat still loomed just beyond our front door. It was a typical Saturday, the kind of day that felt ordinary and unremarkable. I packed up our laundry, a mix of colors and fabrics, ready to tackle the never-ending chore. The laundromat was familiar territory. I had been here many times before, surrounded by the chatter of other customers and the rhythmic sound of machines working hard. As I loaded the washers, I glanced at my son, who was eagerly exploring every corner of the small space. His laughter filled the air, a joyful reminder that even in the mundane, there was life and happiness. I kept a close eye on him, knowing that while the laundromat seemed safe, I couldn't let my guard down completely. With the clothes in the machines, I felt a brief sense of relief, but that sense would soon be shattered. To keep my son entertained while our clothes washed, I decided to take him outside. The small grassy area beside the laundromat was perfect for a little playtime. I watched as he ran around, his little legs moving with excitement, enjoying the freedom of being outside. The sun was bright, and for a moment, everything felt carefree. I settled on a bench, keeping my eyes on him as he laughed and played, blissfully unaware of any dangers around him. The world felt peaceful, but as I glanced around, I couldn't shake a sense of watchfulness. I reminded myself to stay alert, even in this simple moment. Little did I know that peace was about to be interrupted in a way I could never have predicted. As I watched my son play, I noticed a figure in the distance. At first, he looked like any other person walking by, but as he got closer, I realized something was off. He was running toward us in a strange way, his knees lifting high and his arms flailing. His eyes were wide, filled with a manic energy that made my stomach twist with fear. I stood up, instinctively pulling my son closer to me. The man's expression was unsettling, and I could feel my heart racing as I tried to assess the situation. He was moving fast, and the laughter that had filled the air moments before faded into a heavy silence. The carefree atmosphere vanished, replaced by a deep sense of dread as I sensed that something was not right. My instincts kicked in as I saw the man approaching. Panic flooded my mind, and I didn't think twice. I scooped my son into my arms, clutching him tightly as I dashed back toward the safety of the laundromat. My heart pounded in my chest, each step feeling heavier as I glanced over my shoulder to see how close he was. The man continued to run, but his strange behavior only fueled my fear. I could see the manic smile on his face, and it sent chills down my spine. I hurried inside the laundromat, the familiar sounds of machines now feeling distant and surreal. I quickly locked the door behind us, breathless and shaken, hoping that I had acted in time to keep us safe from whatever threat he posed. Once inside, I turned to the window to see what the man was doing. My heart raced as I peered through the glass, trying to gauge whether he would follow us. To my horror, he had stopped just outside, but instead of coming closer, he began to act oddly. He was laughing and rolling on the ground, his movements erratic and wild. I felt a mix of confusion and fear wash over me. What was he doing? Was he playing or was he unwell? The sight of him sprawled out, seemingly having a fit of laughter, made my skin crawl. I held my son tightly, feeling an overwhelming urge to shield him from the unpredictable man outside. I couldn't understand what was happening, but every instinct told me to stay alert and keep my son close. As I watched the man through the window, my mind raced with questions. His laughter echoed in my ears, but it didn't feel joyful, it felt threatening. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. Was he mentally ill, or was there something darker at play? The uncertainty made my heart pound even harder. I stayed glued to the window, my son cradled in my arms, trying to make sense of the scene. I debated whether I should call for help or if that would make things worse. My protective instincts kicked in, and I considered what I needed to do next. Keeping my son safe was my priority, but I felt trapped, unsure of how to handle the situation unfolding right outside. I wished for someone to come and help, to make sense of the chaos and bring some safety back into our day. With my son still in my arms, I knew I had to stay alert. The man's strange behavior was unsettling, and I felt a strong urge to protect my child. I looked around the laundromat, searching for other adults who might notice the situation. Would anyone else see the man outside and understand the danger? I considered my options. Should I rush outside to my car and leave? Or would that provoke him? My heart raced with anxiety as I weighed the choices. Keeping my son safe was all that mattered. I decided to stay put for now, hoping he would eventually leave. As I watched him continue to roll around, a cold knot formed in my stomach. I knew I couldn't ignore what was happening, but I also had to be careful not to act too rashly. The tension in the air felt thick, and I prayed that we would be okay. As I stood there, weighing my options, I felt time stretch on endlessly. The man outside seemed oblivious to the concern he was causing. My son began to squirm in my arms, restless from being held tightly for too long. I whispered soothing words to him, trying to calm my own nerves as much as his. I glanced back at the man, who had finally stopped rolling and was now sitting up, still laughing to himself. A part of me was curious about his actions, but my instincts screamed to keep my distance. I wanted to leave the laundromat, but I feared stepping outside could provoke him. Finally, I decided to call the police, hoping they could handle the situation. My hands trembled as I dialed the number, the weight of fear pressing down on me. I had to make sure we were safe, and I couldn't let fear paralyze me any longer. As I waited for someone to answer, I kept my eyes glued to the window, praying he wouldn't come any closer. As far, I've always had a passion for hunting, especially wild boar. These animals can be fierce and cunning, making them a challenging target. Over the years, I've learned their habits and patterns, studying how they move and where they like to roam. Each hunt teaches me something new, but it also reminds me of the risks involved. Boars are not to be underestimated. They can attack if they feel threatened. With the thrill of the hunt comes the responsibility to stay safe. I know the importance of being prepared and cautious. Every time I head out, I'm aware of my surroundings, constantly scanning for signs of wildlife or other hunters. The woods can be both beautiful and dangerous, and I've learned to respect that. It's a delicate balance of skill, patience, and a touch of luck that keeps me coming back, ready for whatever the night might bring. Before heading out for the night hunt, I meticulously prepare my gear. I check my rifle, ensuring it's clean and ready to fire. I gather my flashlight, extra ammunition, and other essentials, making sure I have everything I need. Each item has its purpose, and forgetting even one can lead to trouble in the field. The excitement builds as I load everything into my truck, ready for the adventure ahead. I've scouted this area before and know it well, but the darkness changes everything. I remind myself to stay sharp and alert. Night hunting means relying on my instincts more than ever. The sounds of the woods become amplified in the silence, and every snap of a twig or rustle in the bushes can send adrenaline coursing through my veins. With everything packed and ready, I take a moment to mentally prepare myself. I remind myself to trust my training, be patient, and respect the wilderness. As I drive toward my hunting spot, I can already feel the thrill of the hunt building within me, eager for the night to unfold. Arriving at my favorite hunting spot, I park my truck and step out into the cool night air. The moon casts a silvery glow over the landscape, illuminating the trees and underbrush. Everything feels different under the cover of darkness. Sounds that would be ordinary during the day now seem amplified and eerie. I take a deep breath, feeling a mix of excitement and caution as I prepare to head into the woods. I've come to this place many times before, drawn by the promise of boar activity. Their tracks and signs are scattered throughout the area, evidence that they frequent this spot. I know to move quietly, using the shadows to my advantage. Every step is deliberate as I navigate the uneven terrain, my senses heightened and alert. As I settle into a good vantage point, I find a spot to wait and listen. The stillness of the night surrounds me, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves or distant animal calls. I feel the anticipation build within me, knowing that the thrill of the hunt is just moments away. But I also remain aware that in the wild, things can change in an instant. As I sat quietly, the night air was filled with tension and expectation. I listened carefully, hoping to hear the sounds of boars moving through the underbrush. Time passed slowly, and I remained still, straining to catch any hint of movement around me. Suddenly, I heard a rustling sound coming from a thicket nearby. My heart began to race as I focused intently on the noise. Was it a boar? I slowly adjusted my position, readying myself for the moment. But as the rustling grew louder, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. Something didn't feel right. Peering into the darkness, I caught a glimpse of movement. My breath hitched as I thought I saw a dark shape pushing through the trees. At first, I assumed it was a boar, but as it came closer, I realized it was something else entirely. The figure was too low to the ground, too erratic in its movement. I felt a chill run down my spine as curiosity mixed with fear. What was I about to encounter in the shadows of the night? As the figure emerged from the shadows, my heart sank. It wasn't a boar at all, it was a man, moving in a way that was both strange and unsettling. He was hunched over, his body low to the ground, and I quickly realized he was completely naked. My instincts screamed at me to retreat, but I was frozen in place, unable to look away. The man's movements were jerky and unpredictable. He seemed to sniff the air and touch the ground as if he were exploring the forest in a wild, animalistic manner. I felt a wave of nausea rise in my stomach as the reality of the situation set in. This was not just a lost hiker or a prankster, something was deeply wrong. I kept my rifle steady, unsure of whether to confront him or run. The darkness around us felt thick, and my mind raced with possibilities. Was he dangerous? What had driven him to this point? I needed to assess the situation quickly, but fear gripped me, making it hard to think clearly. As I watched the man, he suddenly stopped and looked up, his eyes locking onto mine. A chill shot through me. He didn't seem surprised to see me. Instead, he had a strange, almost wild smile on his face. In that moment, I felt a mix of fear and disbelief. How had this situation escalated so quickly? The air was thick with tension as he began to make odd sounds, a mix of grunts and high-pitched calls that echoed through the stillness of the night. It felt like he was trying to communicate, but there was something unsettling about it. My heart raced as I struggled to understand what was happening. Was he lost? Was he in trouble? Then I heard a woman's voice calling for help from somewhere in the darkness. The sound was faint but clear, and it sent a jolt of panic through me. Who was she? Was she with him? I felt the urgency to act, but I was torn between approaching and staying hidden. The situation had turned dangerous, and I needed to make a decision quickly. My mind raced as I considered my options. Should I confront this man, or should I retreat and call for help? The woman's voice echoed in my mind, and I felt a strong urge to investigate, but the risk was immense. I gripped my rifle tighter, weighing the possibility of danger against the need to ensure someone was in trouble. I couldn't ignore the sound of her voice, but was desperate and filled with fear. Gathering my courage, I decided to inch closer, hoping to get a better view of what was happening. As I moved carefully through the underbrush, the naked man continued to make those unsettling sounds, his attention now completely focused on me. With each step, I felt a mix of dread and determination. I had to know if the woman was in danger, but the closer I got, the more I questioned my choice. What if the man turned aggressive? What if I was walking into a trap? Despite the fear gnawing at me, I knew I had to find out the truth, if only to protect myself and anyone else who might be in peril. As I edged closer, I finally caught sight of the area where the man had emerged. The darkness played tricks on my eyes, but I could see a small clearing ahead. My heart pounded as I peered through the trees, scanning for any sign of the woman. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. Suddenly, the man lunged in my direction, breaking the silence with a loud, wild scream. My instincts kicked in, and I raised my rifle, ready to defend myself if necessary. The fear surged through me as I felt the full weight of the situation. I had come here for a hunt, but now I was caught in something far more frightening. In that moment, I knew I had to make a choice. I could either confront him, risking everything, or I could turn back and flee into the safety of the woods. The screams and the woman's voice continued to echo in my mind, urging me to act. I hesitated for only a second, then made my decision. I had to get to the bottom of this, even if it meant putting myself in danger. The day we moved into our new home was filled with promise and excitement. It was a charming house, with a white picket fence and a lovely garden that looked like it could bloom beautifully in the spring. We could already imagine our daughter playing in the yard, making memories in a place that felt like it would be home for years to come. We spent our first days unpacking boxes, arranging furniture, and dreaming about how we would decorate each room. The sun streamed through the windows, filling the space with warmth and light. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to create a life we had always wanted. As we settled in, everything felt perfect, and we were eager to embrace this new chapter together. However, as the initial excitement faded, a sense of unease began to creep in. I noticed odd sounds at night, soft creaks and whispers that seemed to echo in the silence. I brushed it off at first, attributing it to the house settling or the wind outside. But deep down, a part of me wondered if there was more to this home than met the eye. As the weeks passed, the strange occurrences in our home began to pile up. It started with little things, doors creaking open when no one was near, and objects mysteriously shifting from their places. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but soon the unsettling feelings grew too strong to ignore. I began to feel as if I was being watched, especially during quiet moments when the house was still. It was a subtle sensation, like the prickling of someone's gaze on the back of my neck. I found myself looking over my shoulder, convinced there was something lingering in the shadows. My partner noticed my unease, but I struggled to find the right words to explain how I felt. One night, as I was trying to settle down for sleep, I heard a faint whisper echo through the darkened hallways. My heart raced, and I sat up, straining to hear more. But when I listened closely, there was only silence. The feeling of unease settled deeper into my chest, and I knew I had to figure out what was happening in our new home. As the unsettling feelings grew, I knew I had to investigate the source of the strange occurrences. I started by checking every room, looking for anything out of the ordinary. I opened cabinets and drawers, examining the spaces where I thought something might be hiding. Each creak of the floorboards beneath me only heightened my anxiety. Despite my efforts, I found nothing to explain the sounds or the feeling of being watched. I wanted to brush it off, to convince myself that it was just the stress of moving into a new home. But late at night, as I lay in bed, I could hear the whispers again, soft and elusive. They seemed to call to me, but I couldn't make out the words. I decided to reach out to our neighbors, hoping they might shed some light on the house's history. I approached them cautiously, curious about whether anyone else had experienced strange happenings. But each time I brought it up, I was met with hesitant smiles and vague responses. It felt like they were hiding something, and that only added to my growing sense of dread. The more I tried to uncover the truth about our home, the more my fear escalated. It was hard to ignore the feeling that something sinister lingered just out of sight. Strange noises turned into nightly occurrences, with lights flickering and shadows darting past my peripheral vision. I felt as though the house itself was alive, watching and waiting for something. One evening, I sat alone in the living room, my daughter asleep in her crib. The air was thick with silence, and I was just beginning to relax when I heard a loud thud from upstairs. My heart jumped into my throat. I called out, but there was no answer. Every instinct told me to stay put, but curiosity pushed me to investigate. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. As I reached the top, I felt a chill run down my spine. The hallway was dim, lit only by the moonlight filtering through the windows. I could see the door to my daughter's room slightly ajar. With trembling hands, I pushed the door open, my heart racing at the thought of what I might find inside. As I opened the door to my daughter's room, the sight before me froze me in place. The crib was empty, the sheets neatly tucked, but my heart sank at the realization that my daughter was gone. Panic surged through me as I searched the room with frantic eyes, looking for any sign of her. I called her name, my voice shaking, but the only response was the eerie silence that filled the air. Just then, I caught a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye. Turning quickly, I saw a shadow slip out of the room and down the hallway. My instincts kicked in, and I raced after it, fear propelling me forward. The shadow darted around the corner, and I hurried to follow, my heart pounding in my chest. I reached the end of the hallway and paused, breathless. The house felt different now, heavier, as if it was closing in on me. The whispers returned, clearer this time, urging me to find what was hidden. I was terrified, but I knew I had to uncover the truth before it was too late. I steeled myself and stepped further into the darkness, determined to protect my family from whatever was lurking in the shadows. As I ventured deeper into the shadows, the whispers grew louder, echoing around me. I felt as though I was being led, drawn to something that had been hidden away. The air grew colder, and every step I took felt heavy with dread. I reached the staircase leading down to the basement, where the whispers seemed to be originating. My heart raced as I hesitated, unsure if I should proceed. I took a deep breath and descended the stairs, the wooden steps creaking underfoot. The basement was dimly lit, filled with old boxes and forgotten furniture. In the corner, I noticed a flicker of light, a small lantern casting long shadows against the walls. The whispers intensified, wrapping around me like a thick fog. I felt both terrified and compelled to uncover what lay ahead. Moving closer to the lantern, I spotted something on the ground. It was a child's toy, my daughter's favorite stuffed bear, lying abandoned among the clutter. My blood ran cold. How had it ended up here? Panic surged through me as I glanced around, searching for any signs of her. The realization hit me hard. Something was very wrong, and I needed to find my daughter before it was too late. The sight of my daughter's stuffed bear sent chills down my spine. It felt like a message, a sign that I was getting closer to something I didn't understand. My mind raced as I scanned the basement for any other clues, my heart pounding in my chest. The whispers grew louder, filling the space around me, urging me to look deeper. As I moved further into the basement, I noticed a door at the far end, slightly ajar. It wasn't there before, and I felt a surge of dread wash over me. I approached cautiously, the whispers now almost a chant in my ears. I could feel the energy in the room shifting, as if something was waiting for me on the other side. Gathering my courage, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The room was dark, filled with shadows and dust. As my eyes adjusted, I saw something that made my breath catch in my throat, a small, dark figure huddled in the corner. My heart raced as I took a step forward, desperate to see if it was my daughter. But as I drew closer, the figure turned, and I realized with horror that it wasn't her at all. The figure in the corner was not my daughter, it was something else entirely. A small, shadowy shape, with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light around it. My breath quickened as I felt a wave of panic wash over me. I wanted to run, but I was frozen in place, caught in the creature's gaze. It slowly moved closer, its movements jerky and unnatural. I could see it clearly now. Its face was twisted in a way that made my skin crawl. The whispers surged in volume, filling my mind with a cacophony of voices, each one echoing my fear. I felt the urge to scream, to call for help, but the sound caught in my throat. Then, in a sudden rush of instinct, I turned and bolted back toward the stairs. I needed to get out, to find my daughter and escape whatever nightmare had taken hold of our home. As I ran, I could feel the creature behind me, the whispers chasing me, urging me to stop. But I couldn't slow down. The only thing that mattered was reaching the safety of the upper floor. I dashed up the stairs, my heart pounding, desperate to leave the darkness behind.